The stranger heard the wagon before he ever saw it, a dry, complaining sound coming up the long road out of the flats, the kind of sound a wheel makes when it has come farther than it was built to come. Judson Ferrell, 47 years old, set down the bucket he was carrying and stood in the middle of his own yard and waited. He had lived alone on that piece of Nevada ground for 11 years, and in 11 years exactly 4 wagons had turned in at his gate, and 3 of those had been lost. This one was not lost. This one stopped square in front of him, and the woman holding the lines looked down at him the way a person looks at a door they have already decided to knock on. "Mister," she said, "I'll work for our supper." Behind her, 4 faces came up over the sideboards of the wagon, like birds looking out of a nest. Judson Ferrell had answered a good many questions in his life. He had never in his life been asked that one, and he found that it took the words clean out of him. The woman's name was Zilpha Renwick, and she was 35 years old, and she said both of those things plainly, the way you hand over a paper at a land office. Her husband, Foster Renwick, had gone to sleep in the spring and had not woken, peaceful as a candle put out, and the doctor had said afterward that there had been nothing in the world to be done and nothing in the world to blame. She said that part quickly, the way people do when they have said it many times to strangers and have learned that the saying does not get any easier, only faster. "I sew," she said. "I cook. I can salt beef, and I can keep a garden, and I can figure a column of numbers faster than most men can read it. I'm not asking charity. I'm asking for work, and if there isn't any, then point me toward town and we'll go on." Judson looked past her at the 4 faces. He had grown used to a house with 1 plate in it. He had grown so used to it that the sound of 5 people breathing in his yard felt less like an interruption than like something he had been leaving room for without knowing it. "There's work," he said. It was not entirely true when he said it. By supper time it would be. The children came down out of the wagon in order, oldest to youngest, because their mother had taught them that a thing done in order looks less like a mob. Alva was 12, tall for it, with his father's long hands. Roselle was 10, and had a way of standing slightly in front of the smaller ones that nobody had ever asked her to do. Kit was 8, and had questions stacked up in him like cordwood, and Minta was 5, and Minta walked straight past all the polite arrangements of the adults and put her hand flat on the leg of Judson Ferrell's trousers, as if to see whether he was real. "Are you the man with the table?" she asked. "I've got a table," he said. "Mama said there'd be a table someplace." He had to turn around then and busy himself with the bucket for a moment, and none of them said anything about it, which was its own kind of kindness. That evening, Judson Ferrell did a thing he had not done since he was a boy in Missouri. He carried plates out of the cupboard, one after another, until there were 5 of them on the table. He had 4. The 5th he made out of a shallow tin pan that had never held anything but nails. He set it down at the head, kept it for himself, and gave the real china to the rest of them, and if anyone noticed, no one was ill-mannered enough to say so. The stew was thin, and the biscuits were the biscuits of a man who has been cooking for himself alone for a decade, which is to say, they were more like weather than like food. Zilpha ate hers without comment, and then, in the morning, without asking, she took over the stove. By the end of the first week, the biscuits had changed. By the end of the second, so had the house. The ranch itself was a modest one, a strip of good bottom grass, a spring that had never once failed, a barn better built than the house, and 140 head of cattle that Judson worked mostly by himself. What he had was land and time. What he had never had was anyone to hand a thing to. Zilpha Renwick found the work the way water finds a crack. She mended everything in the place that had a tear in it, and there was a great deal. She took the ledger down off the shelf and found, going back 4 years, that Judson had been steadily and cheerfully cheating himself on the price of his own beef. "You've been selling low," she said. "I've been selling easy. There's a difference between easy and foolish, Mr. Ferrell, and you've walked past it about $600 worth." He laughed out loud, which startled the both of them because the sound came out rusty. Neither of them knew it yet, but that ledger would matter a great deal before the winter was over, and not for the reason either one of them supposed. The arrangement they made was a plain one, and they made it out loud so there would be no mistaking it later. Zilpha and the children would live in the old line house at the near end of the meadow, which had 2 rooms and a stove and a roof Judson patched in a single afternoon and a half. She would keep the books, the kitchen, the garden, and the mending. He would pay her wages in coin, on the 1st of the month, written down. The first month she took the money and looked at it a long moment. "I want it written that this is wages," she said, "not a favor. My children will hear which one it was, and I'd rather they heard the right one." Judson wrote it in the ledger in his slow square hand. Wages, Z. Renwick, and under it, because he could not help himself, he wrote the date, and then he sat looking at the date for a while, after she had gone. Amberley, Nevada, in the autumn of 1890, was a town of one long street, and the middle of that street belonged to Leander Skeen. Skeen was 59, and he owned the freight line, and he owned the mercantile the freight line supplied, and he owned, in a quiet way that never appeared on any paper, the opinion of a good many people who bought flour from him. He was not a cruel man. He was something more ordinary and more useful to a story. He was a careful one. He had made a rule 40 years earlier that he did not extend credit to anybody who could not show him land, and he had kept that rule the way other men keep a faith. When Zilpha Renwick came in for thread and coffee and paid in coin, he counted it twice and asked her, mild as milk, whether she was situated at the Ferrell place. "I'm employed at the Ferrell place," she said. "Employed," Skeen said, and wrote it in his book. And there are ways of writing a word down that make it sound like a question. 2 Sundays later, there was talk enough in Amberley that Alva came home with his lips split and would not say who had said what. Zilpha did not go to town and shout at anybody. She did a colder and better thing. She went to the Methodist church the next Sunday morning with her 4 children scrubbed, and her hair done, and her wages sitting in her purse, and she put a dime in the plate, and said good morning to every soul who would look at her, and several who would not, and she did that every Sunday for 9 weeks running, until the talk starved to death for lack of anything to eat. Judson Ferrell, who had not been inside a church in 11 years, sat in the back row for every one of those 9 Sundays with his hat on his knee. What broke it open at last was the weather. The 3rd week of December brought a storm down off the Sierra that nobody had been promised. Warm rain first, all day, and then the temperature falling off a shelf after dark, and the road below the grade, turning to a black glass river in about 90 minutes. Leander Skeen was on that road, with a loaded freight wagon and a hired driver who had never seen ice do what that ice did. The wagon went off the bench at the elbow of the grade, and the team went down, and Skeen went out over the front board into the willows, and the hired man ran 2 miles in the dark to the nearest light he could see, which was a lamp burning in the window of a line house at the near end of a meadow, where a woman was up late finishing a shirt. They got Skeen up to the ranch house on a hay sledge, Judson at the head, and Alva at the boy's end of it, and it took them until nearly 2 in the morning. His right leg was broken below the knee, and 3 of his ribs were cracked, and he had lain in cold water long enough that Doc Barrow, arriving after sunrise, said the leg was the least of it. Skeen stayed at the Ferrell place 19 days. He was, at first, a terrible patient. He asked what it would cost him. He asked it about 4 times, in 4 different ways, and the fourth time, Zilpha Renwick set down the basin and answered him. "Mr. Skeen, there's no bill." "There's not going to be a bill. You may as well spend your strength on getting well, because you're not going to spend it on paying me." He looked at her the way a man looks at a road sign, in a language he does not read. The children were not kept away from him. Their mother had considered it and decided against it. A sick man alone in a room, she said, gets worse at being a person. So Kit brought him the questions he had been stacking up all autumn, hundreds of them, about freight and mules and how much a wagon could carry, and whether a man could ride a mule to California. Roselle brought him coffee at 4 every afternoon and did not once ask him anything, which he came to look forward to more than the coffee. And Minta, who was 5, climbed up on the chair beside his bed on the 6th evening with a primer she could not really read yet, and read it to him anyway, wrong words and all, for 40 minutes, while the wind went along the eaves. Somewhere in the middle of that, Leander Skeen turned his face to the wall. He told them about it on the 12th day, unprompted, the way a stone comes out of a boot. His mother, he said, had kept a house on a road in Illinois in the winter of 1848, and a woman had come to that door with children, and his mother had been afraid of the cost, of the talk, of the 11 other things a frightened person is afraid of, and had sent her on to the next place, 4 miles. They got there, he said. I want that understood. They got there fine. He was quiet a while. But she never got over having said no. She talked about it the year she died, 61 years old, and still turning it over. He looked at the ceiling. I made myself a rule after that. Never be the one caught short. Never be the one who can't pay. I thought that was the lesson. Wasn't it? Judson asked. No, Skeen said. The lesson was the door. He did not make any speeches after that, and nobody in that house ever repeated the story to a living soul in Amberley, which is worth noting because the story would have been worth a great deal to anybody who wanted to take Leander Skeen down a peg. Zilpha Renwick had by then collected, in the natural course of nursing a man for 19 days, enough about the mercantile's ledger and its interest and its quiet roundings up to have made things extremely uncomfortable for him at the county seat. She burned her notes in the stove the morning he went home. Judson watched her do it and did not ask why, and she told him anyway. Because I'd rather he changed than lost, she said. A man who loses just gets meaner someplace else. Leander Skeen went back down to Amberley on the 4th of January on 2 crutches and a borrowed rig, and the first thing he did was not an apology, because he was not a man who could get one out. The first thing he did was open a new book. He called it, on the cover, in his own hand, Accounts Carried. There was no announcement of it. There was no sermon about it. There was simply, from that January forward, a second ledger under the counter of the Amberley Mercantile, and in it, Leander Skeen carried flour and coal oil and boots and school slates for people who could not show him land, and he carried them for as long as it took, and he never once in the remaining 19 years of his life read a name out of that book aloud. He did one more thing. In February, he sent a bill to the Ferrell place. It was itemized, and it was for 19 days of board and nursing, at a rate that would have embarrassed a hotel in Sacramento, and it was marked at the bottom, in the same square, careful hand, Paid in full, DEC, 1890, in coin of a kind I had not seen before. Zilpha framed it. It hung by the door of the ranch house for the rest of her life. They were married in April, when the meadow came back. It was not a dramatic thing, and neither of them pretended it was. Judson Ferrell asked her on a Tuesday, standing by the corral with his hat in both hands, and he began by saying that he wanted it understood that the wages would continue regardless of her answer, because he had thought about it for 4 months, and he was not going to have her say yes to a roof. Zilpha Renwick let him get all the way through it. Then she said, "Judson, I have been setting your table for 6 months. What do you suppose I've been doing it for?" They stood the 4 children up at the front of the little church, and Alva, who was 13 by then, gave his mother away with a face like a boy, carrying something heavy across a creek, and determined not to drop it. Leander Skeen came and sat 2 rows back and shook the groom's hand afterward and said only, "Well," which from him was a full oration. The house got added on to that summer, 2 rooms off the south side, and a longer table, because Judson took the old one out into the yard, cut it clean across the middle, and set a new plank of pine in between, and you could see the seam in it forever after. There is a thing people in that county said for a long time afterward, and it started because of the plates. Judson Ferrell never put a plate away. 5 stayed out on that table, always, set and waiting, even in the years when the children were grown and gone. Alva to the freight line, where Leander Skeen taught him the whole business and then left it to him outright. Roselle to a school in Reno, and back again to teach in Amberley. Kit to 140 head of his own on the far side of the spring. Minta, last, married at 22 on that same meadow in a dress her mother sewed for 11 weeks. 5 plates. Then, as the grandchildren came, 11. Then more. There were people passing through that valley in 1904 who could tell you that if you turned in at the Ferrell gate at supper time, you would find a place already sitting there, as if you had been expected since morning, and nobody would ask you your business until you had eaten. Zilpha Ferrell lived to be 78 and went peacefully, in her own bed, in the fall, with her family around her. Judson followed her the next spring, 90 years old, and stubborn to the end, and the 2 of them are up on the rise above the meadow, under one stone. The stone does not say much, their names and the dates, and one line underneath that Minta chose because she was the one who remembered how it started. It says, "There was room." And the last thing, the thing the family still tells, that first night, October of 1890, when a woman drove a complaining wagon into a stranger's yard and offered him her work, he set 5 places at that table before he had any idea how he'd fill them. He just never took one away.